Please note that no AI, colorization or digital enhancement has been applied to my personal archive of original postcards, photographs, slides and negatives featured on this YouTube channel.
Tucked away in Barnett Street, the Glasscutters Arms is perhaps one of the lesser known public houses of Wordsley. Seemingly laid out in the early 19th century, the street is just off Barnett Lane. The latter is thought by some historians to form part of the route of the old Roman road originating in Droitwich. The road, marked on 18th century maps, is thought to be named after a Kingswinford family named Barnett. Edward Barnett was buried at St Mary's Church in Kingswinford on April 23, 1627. The Glasscutters Arms sat amid a cluster of chimney pots in Victorian streets, and consequently had a loyal customer base. Queen Street, probably named in honour of Queen Victoria, was formerly known as Dunbar Street. Rectory Street, a thoroughfare running parallel to the north, was named after the rectory on the opposite side of the Turnpike Road, the street almost directly facing the driveway to the large house built in 1837. Housing development in these streets was gradual and somewhat piecemeal. The origins of the sign of the Glasscutters Arms extends back to around 1840, when it was opened as a beerhouse by Christopher Young. However, it would appear that this first incarnation of the sign was in a different location. I must acknowledge the work of the Census enumerator of 1841. It is unusual for beerhouses to be named in this early census, but John Hughes took his time on June the 10th, 1841, and writing carefully, recorded many of the significant buildings on his route. Between Workhouse Yard and Church Row he recorded the Glasscutters Arms, where Christopher Young was head of the household. His occupation was listed as a glasscutter and engraver. The inn sign he chose for his house not only showed that he was working in the glass industry himself, it also recognised the large number of glassworkers clustered around in this area. This not only helped to foster a local identity, but encouraged customer loyalty from the local residents, a sound economic decision for many a publican. The census of 1841 indicates that Christopher Young was a widower with 3 young children. Also living in the household was the elderly widow Sarah Ryder. Records show that the wife of the publican and glasscutter Sarah Young had died a few months earlier, aged 35, in March 1841. The elderly Sarah Ryder was probably her mother, as her baptism shows that her parents were Joseph and Sarah Ryder. The Ryder clan were dotted around Worsley, many of whom were engaged in the glass industry. Ryder Street was named after the councillor, Benjamin Ryder. Thought to be the oldest property in the locality, Rose Cottage in Barnett Lane was home to members of the Ryder family for a couple of centuries. It is widely claimed that it was once a tavern known by the sign of the finger, although I have not substantiated this. It is a fact, however, that the land around the building was known as Finger Piece. The Ryder family's connection with the cottage came to an end in the late 20th century, when the spinster Ruth Ryder died. She had operated a small shop during the Second World War. Her brother Cecil was himself a glasscutter. There was a hearing of Christopher Young, an insolvent debtor at Stafford, in March 1847. A newspaper notice for this hearing showed that during his time at the Glasscutters Arms he was also recorded as a licensed brewer. It is therefore most likely that Christopher Young was producing ales in an outbuilding to the rear of the beerhouse. Despite multitasking, the publican found himself in a financial mire, culminating in this hearing at Stafford. By this time he was lodging in the High Street at Stourbridge. His son Christopher continued his career as a glasscutter. Moving to College Street at Amblecote, he possibly worked at the Dennis Glassworks. His younger brother John was also employed as a glasscutter. The building housing the earlier Glasscutters Arms was held on copyhold, though I suspect the Ryder family were connected with the property. The aforementioned Rose Cottage on Barnett Lane was occupied by the glassmaker William Ryder in the 1840s. daughter of a William Ryder, Mary Ann, married William Newman at Kingswinford Parish Church on Christmas Day in 1840. In the census of 1851, the couple were living at Pear Tree Lane at Dudley, from where William Newman worked as a wheelwright. 10 years later, they were living in what would become Barnett Street. In 1851, the Newman household was one of only 2 properties recording within a parcel of ground known as Eightlands, the other being the home of the glassmaker Henry Hammond and his family. In 1857, the Wordsley Freehold Land Society acquired 2 fields named Eightlands and Fingerpiece, which brings us closer to the history of the present Glasscutters Arms. Following the Reform Act of 1832, a number of freehold land societies were formed in the UK, a principal aim being to provide the vote and home ownership for working men. Yes, I'm afraid that it was only for the male half of the population. The announcement of the Land Society's intention to buy the fields was signed by Philip Pargeter, a glass engraver who would later own the Red House Glassworks. As a form of building society, the body at Worsley was rather late in the day, but did make provision for the industrious proletariat of the area. It would seem that William Newman, perhaps with help from the Ryder family, seized his opportunity to become a freeholder. Lie-born William Newman was recorded as a carpenter in the census of 1861. However, he strived to open a hostelry and revive the sign of the Glasscutters Arms. He paid the requisite 3 guineas to the excise and established a beer house for the property erected on the plot acquired via the Worsley Freehold Land Society. Although a carpenter by trade, William Newman wisely revived the design of the Glasscutters Arms. It was a no-brainer really, for on the adjacent plot of land, a former carpenter turned glass engraver had, along with his business partners, established a glass factory. The hot conditions under which the thirsty glassworkers toiled created an instant customer base. The son of the beer retailer, William, was also a glasscutter. The new Glassworks was operated by brothers John and Joseph Northwood. It was just over the garden wall of the Glasscutters Arms that one of the most famous works of cameo glass was created. As a 12-year-old, John Northwood was apprenticed to Richardson's, where in the decorating section he honed skills in painting, gilding and enamelling. When the factory closed down, he went to work in carpentry for his older brother William, a local builder. However, when Benjamin Richardson reopened the factory in 1852, John Northwood returned to his true vocation. It was in 1859 that he entered into a partnership with Henry Getting Richardson and Thomas Guest, establishing their works on the adjacent plot acquired by the Worsley Freehold Land Society. John Northwood brought his brother Joseph into the business, and when the partnership was dissolved in 1860, they carried on the business as J and J Northwood. Legend has it that John Northwood and his cousin Philip Pargeter had often seen and envied the Portland vase in the British Museum. The pair were also admirers of the reproduction in pottery at Josiah Wedgwood's factory in the Potteries. Indeed, they became a tad obsessed with the Portland vase, perhaps as a result of a competition to duplicate it in glass, with factory owner Benjamin Richardson offering £1,000 to anyone who could create such a piece. Philip Pargeter, it is said, remarked to John Northwood that he could make the vase if he could decorate it. John Northwood, working with etching tools that he had invented himself, was confident that he could pull it off. It took some 3 years to complete the highly skilled work, and the vase was completed in 1876. It is regarded as one of the most important works in glass, and is housed in the Corning Museum of Glass in New York State. John Northwood's magnus opus must have been a topic of conversation in the neighbouring Glasscutters Arms. His employees no doubt witnessed the slow progress of the vase as John Northwood applied his skills to the piece. They would probably report on progress whilst supping their ale in the Glasscutters Arms. It was only beer or cider that they could drink in those days, as the pub did not have a full licence. At the Stew Pony licensing meeting of August 1866, William Newman, supported by Mr. Maltby, was one of 14 applicants for a full licence. He was unsuccessful. Indeed, only 4 publicans were granted their full licence at these sessions. William Newman applied again at the sessions of 1868, but was again unsuccessful. During the latter part of the 20th century and in the 21st century, the inn sign hanging outside the pub displayed George Woodall, a glass artist assembling the Woodall team who were responsible for the Great Tatzer. George and Thomas Woodall were apprentices to John Northwood. Thomas was educated at the Worsley National School and Stourbridge School of Art. He is thought to have worked on the preparatory stages of the Portland vase. He and his brother, who also came to the School of Art, joined Thomas Webb and Sons in the mid-1870s. Both men created some of the finest cameo pieces, and their works command fantastic sums when sold at auction. George Woodall is regarded as the best glass cameo cutter to emerge during the Victorian period, though others claim that his brother was the most brilliant of the cameo sculptors. I've not seen any evidence that William Newman was brewing ales behind the Glasscutters' arms. However, in a notice for an auction sale of the Cliff House at nearby Buckpool, it would seem that William Newman was involved in the production of ales within a property adjoining. When not engaged with the running of the Glasscutters' arms, William Newman continued to work as a foundry carpenter and wheelwright. His sons John and Samuel followed in his footsteps as carpenters. Other children would fly the nest and follow different career paths. However, the couple's daughter Jane remained at the house and worked in the Glasscutters' arms. Mary Ann Newman died in October 1887, and 4 years later the publican William Newman passed away. Ownership of the Glasscutters' arms passed to daughter Jane Newman, the licence of the house being transferred to her in October 1892. In the following October, she married the widower Alfred Ryder, a glasscutter of Barnett Lane. He had 2 young children, Benjamin and Violet, from his previous marriage to Phoebe Ann Bratt. The licence of the Glasscutters' arms passed to him on January the 15th, 1894. Ownership of the property, however, remained with Jane. She was a widow within a short period, as Alfred Ryder died in June 1896. In the following petty sessions, held on August the 10th, the licence of the Glasscutters' arms was returned to Jane Ryder. The Glasscutters' arms was still only retailing beer and cider in the late Victorian era. The house would not be fully licensed until the post-war years. In the spring of 1900, Jane Ryder remarried to widower Arthur Lashford, a native of Wollaston. An image of the Lashford family can be found in a frame on the wall inside the Glasscutters' arms. The photograph was taken prior to them giving up the pub in 1905. Arthur Lashford died at a relatively early age in June 1910. Jane Lashford, widow and former landlady of the Glasscutters' arms, lived comfortably in retirement in Rectory Street until her death in May 1930. Following the long association of the Newman-Ryder families with the Glasscutters' arms, the pub was taken over by Frederick Warren in the mid-Edwardian period. The beer house was one of 9 public houses that were operated by his brewery behind the Plough Inn at Church Street in Brierley Hill. Both the Plough Inn and brewery were owned by George Elwell of the Delft Brewery. In his will dated 1908, he left the Plough Inn, brewery and cash to his daughter Agnes, wife of Frederick Warren. It was Albert Elwell, a member of the extended family, who was initially installed as manager of the Glasscutters' arms. In 1909, Frederick Loach took over as licensee and remained at the Glasscutters' arms for 3 decades. I suspect that he was the same Frederick Loach that had previously kept the Bottle and Glass Inn at Brockmore, the pub rebuilt in the Black Country Museum. Born in 1870 at Moor Lane in Brockmore, he was the son of the grocers and fruiterers John and Emily Loach. His second marriage he tied the knot with Matilda Skidmore in October 1903. Frederick Loach seemed to have been helping with the family grocery business when he suffered an accident in October 1913. He was loading flour into a cart at Webb's Flour Mills when, in stepping from a platform onto one of the spokes of the wheel, he slipped owing to the horse starting and broke his leg. He was removed to the Glasscutters Arms and attended by Dr. Taylor, but he would be out of action for some time. One of the key annual events hosted by Frederick and Matilda Loach was the dinner held by the Dividend Club, an important local collective that acted as a safe net for those in need during sickness. Although a serious meeting during which the club's finances were disclosed, along with the announcement of any dividend, these were social occasions in which members enjoyed a supper inside the Glasscutters Arms, following which the evening was spent in a musical fashion. The Loach family managed the Glasscutters Arms during its transition from being a house selling local beers to an outlet of one of Birmingham's big brewing concerns. Following the death of brewer and publican Frederick Warren in 1924, the small estate of tied houses was sold. An auction sale was held at the Dudley Arms Hotel in March 1926. The Glasscutters Arms was described as having an entrance passage from front to back, front smoke room, front tap room, back bar and living kitchen combined, and a side entrance to a scullery, 3 bedrooms and a clubroom. The property realised £1,775 and was knocked down to agents acting on behalf of Frederick Smith Limited of Aston. A freehold villa residence immediately adjoining the Glasscutters Arms, known as Hillsborough, and let to Mrs. Brindley, was also sold at this time. I suspect that this property stood on what is now the pub's car park. There was a tragic incident at the Glasscutters Arms one Saturday in the summer of 1933. A grandson of Frederick and Matilda Loach, 11-year-old Alfred Loach of Campbell Street in Brockmore, was playing at the rear of the pub when he slipped from the roof of a brick-built dog kennel. In his fall, the poor lad came into contact with a wire clothesline. His grandmother Matilda attended to him, and the boy appeared little worse for the fall. However, the next morning he was so ill his parents called in Dr. Butterworth of Pensnet. After examining the boy, he ordered his removal to Corbett Hospital, where he died on the Monday. His injuries included a fractured skull. The Glasscutters Arms was granted a full licence in February 1952. 3 years later, Frederick Smith Limited was acquired by William Butler's Springfield Brewery of Wolverhampton. The beer selection at the Glasscutters Arms would have changed, and no longer would the locals enjoy the highly regarded Aston beers. William and Alice Mason kept the house for Butlers in the 1950s. During the Second World War, he had worked as a stockkeeper at a local glassworks. As a widow, Alice continued as landlady until 1968. In the 1980s, the Glasscutters Arms was operated by Shrewsbury and Wem Brewery Co. Limited, a brewery that enjoyed a great deal of autonomy despite being taken over by Greenall Whitley & Co. in 1951. It was Shrewsbury and Wem that applied to extend the existing bowling green to the rear of the pub. The old bowling green had been in existence since the interwar years. The brewery applied to extend the playing surface across part of the old beer garden. In 1988, there was one lucky punter of the Glasscutters Arms. A resident of the street, Tim Goll, turned up for the New Year's Eve fancy dress, part of a competition organised by the pub's operators. Tim Goll, along with his girlfriend's father, turned up at their local dressed as a pantomime cow. He won the competition organised by the brewery and won a holiday for 2 at Hong Kong. In the late 1990s, the Glasscutters Arms was being run by David and Anne Whitehouse, a couple that seemed to run a tight ship. They had actually met in the pub some years previously, so the Glasscutters Arms formed an important part of their lives. At this time, the interior walls of the pub featured photographs of the Glasscutters Bowling Club and also some of the Wordsley Wasps Football Club, a team that was based here based their headquarters here. Also to be found in the pub was a collection of steam trains, which were much appreciated by local enthusiasts, in particular Geoffrey Ames, who had kept the pub with his partner in the early 1970s. A retired railwayman, he also ran the pub's Dominoes team. In July 2023, the Glasscutters Arms, operated by Punch, was acquired by the Red Pub Company, a firm based at Bloomfield Road in Tipton. Thanks for viewing and listening to my blurb. If you enjoyed the video, please give a thumbs up. Post your comments below if you have more info or a question. If you think these video clips rock, you can also subscribe to the channel.